on this episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists.
Now, it doesn't sound like 100 miles off the coast of Florida should have any sort of impact on Florida. We did get some winds, we did get some rain. But what people don't understand about hurricanes is it's not necessarily the winds that, like a tornado, you think about, oh, the winds are like killing things off and, taking houses out of the ground. For hurricanes, a lot of it's the water part of it. An entire state can't evacuate. Everyone backing up, jumping into their cars, and heading north may seem like a great idea. However, the truth is that those of us in, quote, safer inland regions generally need to stay put to reserve the roads, gas, hotel rooms, shelters, plane tickets, etc. for the most vulnerable folks who live on the coast in the storm's path, where evacuation orders do exist.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists podcast, episode number 456. My name's Andrew.
And I'm Annie.
What's going on? You ready for this episode?
Yes, let's do it.
This is, listeners, you can see by the title of this episode, we're going to be talking about natural disasters in this one. And I know that we were going to originally do a student roundtable episode for this week, but this one felt a little bit more pressing, so we're going to bump that one back just a little bit. But one of the things, and the reason why this is top of mind for myself is, Helene just came through, 10, 11 days ago at the time of this recording, Hurricane Helene, for those of you that don't live on the eastern side of the world and also don't listen to the news. Eastern side of the United States, not the world. The world revolves around Andrew. I think that's what we're looking at. Helene came up. I want to talk about that one first, very specifically. I want to talk about Milton that's coming through. I want to talk about hurricanes. I want to talk about like tornado prep. I want to talk about all of these things on this episode. But for the most part, I kind of want to recap just kind of what has been happening. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it's good to update everyone.
So Helene, it was a huge storm. That the funny thing is, I think the news actually makes it out to be worse than it is in some cases.
Certainly.
And then I think with people's political agendas at this point in time leading up to a presidential election here in a month, they're really playing to certain types of, in my opinion, it's fear-mongering a lot of the stuff. And I think kind of hurting people's ability to get help. But that's, again, Andrew's a little bend on things. So Helene came up. It was 100 miles off the coast of Florida. Now, it doesn't sound like 100 miles off the coast of Florida should have any sort of impact on Florida. We did get some winds. We did get some rain. But what people don't understand about hurricanes is it's not necessarily the winds that, like a tornado, you think about, oh, the winds are like killing things off and, taking houses out of the ground. For hurricanes, a lot of it's the water part of it. And so we had, in Tampa specifically, where I live, it's the tidal surges. The tidal surges are a big deal. It's historic record-breaking tidal surges. And when all of that salt water comes onto land, it's never good. Right. And so people's houses obviously got destroyed, cars underwater. But you have to think about how far inland can ocean water get?
Right.
And so what a lot of times what will happen is these counties will have evacuation zones. Ours are A through E, and it's just like how far inland you are and how far away from basically sitting water, still water that you are. So Tampa Bay actually has a bay full of water and also the ocean. So those areas were really highly affected. Well, then the storm made landfall kind of in the Big Bend area, kind of like the panhandle of Florida, and went up through Georgia, went up to the Carolinas, wreaked a lot of havoc up there. And the problem up there was still the water. It was still water problem. All of the rain causing landslides and mudslides and all the flooding, everything. And with all of that, now you have if you think about the avalanche, we always think about avalanches and how all of the trees come down with it, right? The same thing happens in mudslides. And so it just wipes out everything. And then these rivers swell over their banks, and then they get into the communities, and then there's just a torrential current ruining everything.
Yes.
It's water on all the different sides, just ruining so much. And a lot of these areas aren't built like, Florida's built on sand basically. So it's decent drainage to a certain point. There's just nowhere for the water to go in these other states. And so it just caused all sorts of problems. So we are still reeling from this. And now here comes Milton. Good old Milton coming out from, and it's interesting too. I look at the pathways of hurricanes often, and this is a different pathway that I've seen. I've only been here for 4 years, so I'm not the expert, but a lot of times they come from different areas. This one's coming from basically Mexico, almost due east, and it's just going to ram right through Tampa, go up through Orlando. I mean, that's where the trajectory is right now. And again, we're concerned more about tidal surges. We're concerned more about water than anything else. And so that's kind of, for our family, I just, again, putting it out there for everyone, we're probably going to be okay. Although we're recording this the day before it's supposed to hit, so we'll see what happens afterwards. We expect to lose power for a couple of days, and we expect, kind of some of those things to happen. And we'll get into kind of like the prep work for homes and offices and what offices need to do, a little bit later in this episode. But I think we are about 20 minutes north of Tampa, about 20 minutes inland. So we are relatively safe. We also don't have any rivers around us, and we're up. Florida's all flat. That's the thing.
Yes.
So sea level, and then I think Tampa's like 50 feet above sea level. We're about 75 feet above sea level. So we're up considerably when you think about it. So we're hoping for all the good stuff to happen. But obviously a lot of homes, a lot of lives are going to be in jeopardy here with this storm. So that's what's happening currently. But the bigger picture is this kind of stuff is happening often. It seems to be picking up a little bit. Hurricanes are happening at weird times, different patterns than we've ever seen them before. Tornadoes obviously are happening. Earthquakes are happening. Earthquakes have been happening at an increased level in certain areas for, probably, I remember listening 25 years ago and hearing the news. I remember when I was in California living there when I was a kid, hearing about the hurricanes and the fault lines and all these different things.
Yep.
And so it's, natural disasters are just a part of life, unfortunately. And so I think, with this episode, so it's a 6-minute lead up, but I think, we really want to talk about like what do patients need to prepare for? What do clinicians need to be prepared for? What offices need to be prepared for? And all of that. Have you lived through a natural disaster before?
I haven't. I grew up in Southern California, so it was always just earthquakes and wildfires, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so,
wildfires is another one. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Wildfires is pretty common. And then when I was living in Central Oregon, it was wildfires all the time in the summer. So I feel like wildfires are more what I'm more accustomed to. But even earthquakes, we always prepared for earthquakes. We always did earthquake drills in school. And in my time living in Southern California, growing up, we never had like a huge one, but it was pretty commonplace. So
yeah.
But I've never lived through anything like a hurricane, tornado, like nothing like that.
I want the listeners to understand, like, I'm not taking this storm lightly, but I am weirdly excited about this opportunity. And it's so stupid because it's going to hurt so many people. I understand that, but I'm not hurting people. There's nothing we can do about it, right? So I'm trying to be as optimistic as possible. But similarly, I also have never really been through, I've been through some good tropical storms. I've been through some earthquakes, but the earthquake, I think the biggest earthquake I had was actually when we were in Washington State. It was probably, ninth grade or something like that. And I remember looking out at the fields, like the football fields and stuff, and like it was like rolling.
Yes.
And I'm like, what, the earth can roll? Like this is so
There's different
weird.
types of earthquakes, like the jolting ones versus the rolling ones. Yes.
Yeah. It was absolutely incredible. Oh, and volcanoes and stuff like that. I forgot that Mount St. Helens, that was before me. But so it's really interesting. But I'm weirdly excited about this. I'm just like, I kind of want to feel the force of nature, like the strength of, I'm not going outside or anything like that. Don't worry. I'm not going to be
It's pretty
dumb.
incredible. Like you said, just like the strength of nature. It's incredible.
Can you imagine too, like a lot of these bigger like hurricanes, like there's one that's out in the Atlantic right now. It's just crazy big. And I think, was it Helene that was like 200 miles wide or something like that? 200 miles is a long ways.
Huge.
These ones in the Atlantic are just so, like, can you imagine being like a boat in the middle of that? Or just like, there's a lot of these things that happen off the coast.
Right. That happen off the coast that don't like make landfall. They're just like out off. Like it's crazy. I imagine it being a boat out there, you wouldn't survive.
Yeah. I want to read one thing. It came from, shout out to Connie Simmons, one of our friends that lives here in Florida. She posted, and I think it's a repost. I think this is something that's kind of going around. Stephanie Baker, I don't actually know super well, but shout out to Stephanie Baker as well. I want to read this one thing because it's how Floridians feel. I've been getting inundated with text messages probably from like 2 days ago and Facebook messages and stuff like that. And it's like, hey, are you doing okay? And jokingly, you said it earlier when we got on, you weren't joking, but you were serious, but like, not to make fun of you too much. We're like, hey, what's the weather like? How you doing? I was like, it's 85 and sunny right now. And it's 24 hours before the storm hits.
Right.
This is interesting. And I feel like there's a couple of things I want to kind of bring up, and then we'll kind of get into office prep stuff. Is that okay?
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. So this says, dear everyone who doesn't live in Florida, but loves someone who does, here are some things you need to know about hurricanes. They don't come until they come. So if you ask us how we're doing 72 hours before we expect the winds to start, don't be surprised if we tell you that we're fine. Please believe us, we're actively preparing and we're watching the forecast more closely than you are, but we're truly fine at the moment. Hurricanes are unpredictable. No matter how good the models are, hurricanes often demonstrate a mind of their own. We're always hoping and praying for a turn or a, quote, wobble that sends the monster further from civilization. But if you ask us what's going to happen 3 or 4 days from now, we honestly don't know, and neither do the meteorologists. An entire state can't evacuate, and that's a big one because everyone's like, how are you evacuating? And I was kind of poking fun of my brother. I'm like, I'm sorry. You think all 3 million of us out of Tampa are going to evacuate? Like, where are we going to go?
Yeah.
Like, no one can hold a whole state. Like, that's just impossible. Yes. An entire state can't evacuate. Everyone packing up, jumping into their cars, and heading north may seem like a great idea. However, the truth is that those of us in, quote, safer inland regions generally need to stay put to reserve the roads, gas, hotel rooms, shelters, plane tickets, etc., for the most vulnerable folks who live on the coast in the storm's path, where evacuation orders do exist. Some inland folks may choose to leave, but most of us stay put and follow the instructions of our local government. We truly appreciate your love and concern, the offers to stay in your homes, etc. Know that the national media is doing a pretty good job of stirring up your anxiety, which, by the way, they are. I've watched national media versus our local stuff. I'm like, oh, this is way different. But our local weather teams are much calmer and much more knowledgeable about how hurricanes affect our specific areas. They are working nonstop to give us updates and telling us to prepare. We trust them. When the time comes, the sleeves are rolled up and we're told to hunker down, we'll be ready. Of course, we're worried, but we're trying to do all the things to prepare and not freak out. Thanks for offering words of love and encouragement and not just jumping on the freak out wagon. It just makes that much harder on us. Love, your Florida loved ones. P.S. Ask how we are after it passes. I think that's probably true of anything. I know it's like that's a very Florida specific thing, but like the natural disasters that are coming, I think sometimes they know when like a volcano is going to erupt or things like that.
Right.
You just don't, just stay out of it and let them do their thing until they're done and then check on them afterwards. I think that's kind of a thing. Unless, I guess, there would be a couple of cases where maybe you could offer assistance in like helping them evacuate, assuming that they live on the coast, they do this thing, whatever. Like, I think that there's, if you have resources, if you have a plane or whatever, I don't know who listening to this podcast has a plane just handy to go pick up their friends whenever in the middle of a disaster. Yeah, but I mean, someone's got it, right?
Right. You never know.
So that's an interesting. I don't know. What did you think about those words?
Yeah. Oh, I thought that was great because I think like you had mentioned, like the national versus local news, like definitely I could see where it causes little hysteria for those, even like myself that knows like nothing about it experiencing being in a natural disaster like a hurricane. But like you said, like they had said so clearly, like it doesn't happen until it's happened. Like we're fine right now. Like what else am I going to say? I'm just doing what I can to prepare and, see how it goes afterwards. But it was also a good perspective too, as far as those that are in a safe area to stay there and just to free up resources for those who are going to be truly affected. So I liked that they brought that up as well.
You kind of don't think about that a lot too. It's like, so right now out of Tampa, there's 2 major highways, freeways. One is 75 north and south, and it's last night when I was watching the news, they had, the choppers, you doing the aerial videos of them. And it's, stop and go back, back to back, bumper to bumper, all the way for, miles and miles.
Yes.
And then between here and Orlando is I-4, and everyone trying to get to Orlando. I mean, it was just gridlocked also. And then what'll happen is that'll happen for lots of hours. And it'll kind of open up a little bit, middle of the morning, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., or whatever. Then it'll get packed again starting at 4 or 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And then when that happens, people start running out of gas on the side of the road. And no one can get to them because it's gridlocked. And so then they try and move up to the shoulder. Well, guess what? They open the shoulders to people driving on for these types of disasters. Well, now they blocked a shoulder. Now people can't get, so it makes it even worse. And so,
it's such a mess.
Yeah, if you don't have to evacuate, you really need to stay in place as much as you can and prepare your home for that. It's also interesting to go back to the whole news thing, and I kind of mentioned this earlier. The evacuation orders are given out through our local news. So they say, okay, zone A, you need to be out now. Zone B, you need to be out. And that's to help with like a orderly fashion of evacuation.
Sure.
So that this kind of stuff doesn't happen.
Yes.
But then, I'll get a call from a friend in hysteria saying, oh my gosh, Tampa's evacuating, because that's what the national news says, is Tampa's evacuating.
Right.
Not zone A of Tampa. That's 100 yards from the ocean, and that's the only little sliver of people need to evacuate.
And I didn't realize there were zones, but that would make sense.
Yeah. I mean, when you live in a place like this, of course, like they've been going through this for so long. They know kind of what they're doing.
Definitely.
They might be a little bit rusty doing it because they haven't really been hit in Tampa since 1921.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Tampa's been interesting. Like for all these years, I've been kind of helping to calm the nerves of the people that we've left, on the other side of the United States.
Yeah.
There's always like, every time a hurricane comes up, we always get messages like, oh, that's way down in Miami. Like that's a 5-hour drive from us. Like that's not even close to us. It's not, it's going east to west, not north to south or whatever.
Right.
And so now I'm like, oh crap.
It's happening. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't ever hit Tampa anymore.
Exactly.
All right. Let's transition now into like the prep work that needs to be done. I've thought of a few things. I don't know. We should have compared notes before our podcast, but we didn't.
No, that's okay.
What are some of the thoughts that you had kind of initially as far as office prep in addition to like home prep stuff?
Well, I'd say like home prep, again, like my perspective is more from like earthquakes and wildfires. And I think about like home prep as far as like stocking up on the canned goods and water and those like basic things so that if you couldn't access them, that you would be okay for a little while. But I think for offices, like dental offices, I know I was curious like what that looks like, especially in a hurricane. I think like I'm assuming offices just shut down and they just contact their patients when it's safe to open back up, or in the event that offices make it through the hurricane. And
yeah, I mean it's a good point. So there's lots of things I think that people need to think about. One is abating the threat, I guess. So our friend Brittany, who listeners, like longtime listeners know, Brittany was part of the podcast for a really long time. They had an issue with a wildfire up at the cabin up in Idaho, and I think wildfires are I'm glad you brought that up because that's a freaking roaring episode on the West Coast all the time. It feels like every summer.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what they did is they had to set up kind of like a sprinkler system, right, to make sure that I think it was keeping you put it on the house, right? You put it on the cabin, on the roof of the cabin, to try and keep everything wet.
Yeah.
And so when the embers are floating around and they land inevitably on the top of the cabin, it doesn't start a fire.
Yeah.
And I think that if that is what the office is looking at, and you're in a space that you can do that, residential obviously is going to be a little bit different than kind of a rural area. I think I've never been to Flagstaff, but I think about Flagstaff and some of maybe like the outer areas. If there was a dental office that's a little bit further out and kind of trees and stuff like that, you'd want to make sure that well in advance that you have enough clearing so that the trees aren't going to catch fire next to you, the brushes or whatever, that you have a well like landscaped area. I think that's like the first thing you need to really think about is a well landscaped area, and then also whatever's happening, whether it's going to be flood water coming in and you need sandbags.
I was going to say sandbags, definitely.
Or a sprinkler system if it's fire or something like that. Obviously, earthquakes is going to be a little bit harder to prepare for, but you just have to make sure everything's up to code. Your dental office is built right. If this was a office that you built that was or that you purchased that was built, a long time ago, then you need to probably have someone come in and just make sure everything's up to code. Because a lot of times, especially in Southern California, you have certain, earthquake braces that you need to have installed.
Yeah.
And and it's kind of a costly process. It also is, you have to shut down the office and things like that. So I think the bigger picture is, where do you live? What kind of natural disasters could potentially happen?
Sure.
And what are you doing to prevent them or get there? Okay. So that's one. I think it's kind of an obvious one, but I think a lot of offices don't really think that way because it's never happened to them. It never hurt them before. It's never hit that area. It's never hit Tampa before since 1921.
Right. And I don't think any of us are free of natural disasters. It's going to happen at some point, whatever it is.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, it's going to happen probably just, at some point.
And just being prepared.
Yeah. I mean, just being prepared for it. And then, in the office, obviously you don't need to have, canned goods and things like that. That's definitely for at home, right? Making sure that you have, the food and the water. But I think towards the water part, you need to make sure Florida has a lot of natural gas stuff. And so you need to make sure that your natural gas is turned off. You need to make sure that your, everything that could be a problem, your water's turned off, anything that could break or burst while you're not there isn't going to exacerbate the problem.
That's the thing about having backup generators, I think, is so critical too. I think about that in Southern California if we would lose power for whatever reason. I think that's a big part too. But then when you talk about water and stuff with hurricanes, that's another issue. But
well, and that's hard because you have electrical things that need to be looked at. You have plumbing. You have all these different things to look at. And I think there's this one really cool thing. If you're listening and you have a minute to just Google this, Tampa General did. They have a new barrier. I think, I don't know if we talked about this before, but it's for flooding. And instead of having sandbags, it's basically this piece of plastic in an L shape. And you put the lower part of the L towards where the water's coming from.
Sure.
Now, the weight of the water sitting on top of that is going to make sure that it doesn't push it over.
Oh.
And then you create a wall and it insulates the whole thing. And so I think it was Tampa General, they had like 4 or 5 feet of water just sitting outside of their hospital that they never got touched because of these things. And they're so lightweight. It's like moving
a simple concept.
A lightweight like chair, like a chair at your house or whatever. And so you can stack a bunch of them and then just get a dolly or even some sort of machinery, and you can just like really quickly set all of these things up. I mean, way faster than sandbags and moving sandbags around. And then, I mean, you can have it, I think theirs was probably a 10-foot one because it was like halfway up and it was really tall.
Wow. Because something like that, I mean, the hospitals during that time too, like in the event of a hurricane and people needing access to medical care. I mean, it's like a hospital can't just shut down. Like, depend on hospitals.
They do actually.
I'm sure they do. Like, what?
They
can't expect their employees to be there during the hurricane.
No, and I mean, there's some in the ICU and stuff that like some people just can't move, right? So there's always limitations. But okay, getting back to office prep.
Yeah.
So I think another big thing though is thinking about moving all of your patient records, patient information to the cloud. Right? I think that's
certainly
a thing that if you have a server at your office, you need to protect that. That is your lifeline for your business.
Absolutely.
And so either taking that offline or just being a way to upload everything to the cloud. And it has to be done securely, which is another big thing. And so investing time and money well ahead of the disaster to make that upgrade is super important.
Yes.
Because if not only like being able to access your patient records that you've already treated is necessary, but I think also kind of in the event that you did need to reach out to everybody, you need to be able to like kind of quickly have a way of doing that. And there are services that'll come in and cull that information and send out those notifications for you, which is great. But you need to be able to be online to do that.
Yeah.
And also if you're still in the 30s and you're still doing paper charts.
I was going to say, if you're using paper charts. Yeah. If water comes through and destroys everything, what do you have? So
exactly. And you're responsible for all that information too. And so that's kind of the other thing too, is like, even if something gets partially damaged and then you have looters come in at the end and they steal that patient information, like now you're in a lot of trouble because you have to disclose all of that. And then there's usually like lawsuits and settlements and stuff that come from that as well. So the patient records, the patient information is super, super important.
So critical on top of already like recovering your office and everything. just
Yeah.
preparing, putting everything into a cloud-based system is just less stressful.
Yeah. I think also just having insurance. Insurance is kind of a big one. Florida's getting harder and harder to be insured, which is really unfortunate. But for your practices, you need to have insurance. I think it's really important also for hygienists to be insured, but that's kind of a whole different topic we'll cover maybe on a later episode.
Becoming harder to be insured because insurance companies don't want to cover because of these natural disasters?
Yeah, and not just that, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, because there's weird things that happen in Florida. I mean, we all know Florida's just a crazy place anyway.
Yeah.
But, they'll have like sinkholes that just open up. The ground just opens up and
It's
swallows
wild.
up a whole parking lot.
And insurance companies don't want,
whatever.
they don't want to
Oh, and a lot of the policies aren't even insuring against that kind of stuff because they just, one, it's too risky and they're like, we're not going to do it. But two, they're also just like, oh my gosh, we're not going to, the insured is not going to pay that much more money for something that's super unlikely to happen.
Right.
They're more willing to roll the dice.
Certainly.
And so you think about all the people in Asheville and things like that, they were not insured for flood damage because why would you be way up there? It's not going to flood
in the mountains.
20 feet above the flood table.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not going to happen. And then until it does, right?
Until it does. Yep.
But so I think being insured for your practice is really important. If you do have specialized equipment, I think taking the time to remove that,
you have absolutely
notice.
Equipment that's mobile.
It's one of those. You're not going to probably move a CBCT. Like, I think one person probably is not going to be able to.
Well, like your scanners and I don't know. I feel like scanners are.
If you have like a GBT or if you have some of these other things, like
those mobile units for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And then that goes back to, do you have a vehicle like within your practice that's able to move some of these things? You're not going to be able to go get a U-Haul or whatever and, move it. A lot of people are already going to be doing that kind of stuff, especially if it's like a back-to-back, disasters like we've had here. I know there's a lot of private companies that are being employed by the state that are removing debris just so that with this new one, it doesn't cause even more problems.
There's a compound,
Yeah, so they're trying to clean up stuff quickly so that hopefully it'll lessen some of the compounding damage. But yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to have access to that. So do you have a truck? Do you have an SUV? Does someone in your office have an SUV? I think also just having a phone tree situation readily available for your employees is really important, and knowing what their plans are. So if you are a business owner, that's different. But I think also if you're a lead hygienist or if you have a co-hygienist, if you have an assistant that works with you, I think it's the human thing to do, but it's also, I think, part of your responsibility as a leader in the office as a hygienist. Like, we're all leaders in our offices. Whether or not that we're treated that way is a different thing, but we should consider ourselves as leaders, and we should have a phone tree. We should have the ability to communicate with each other and give updates as needed.
Yeah, because what happens in the event of cell service is out? Like, how do you get in contact with people? Like, what does that look like? Like you said, I mean, having some sort of, at least being aware of everyone's plans. I think just so that way we can know where everyone is in some sense.
No, I mean, you're
if you
exactly
can't get
right.
in contact with them through cell, until the phone lines get back up again, it's hard to know where people are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you know where, what their plans are, and if you know people's addresses and it's hard because I know that, there's been a lot of turnover in the industry lately, and it's hard to get kind of close to people sometimes and trust them with like your address or whatever.
Certainly.
But I think in these particular cases, you guys need to have a disaster plan, emergency plan. And someone needs to be checking on these people. They need to be driving around if possible, drive around and just, check on them if cell service is down.
Yep.
But also just kind of have a plan in place of, okay, so, hygienist A is going to stay in place. Hygienist B is hightailing it out. They got out. We're good. We don't need to check on them.
Yep.
And then, it's nice to go check on their place. I have so David Rice is kind of local-ish to me.
Yes.
But he's down in that evacuation area. That's where his home is.
Yes.
And so he's gone. They left and they're fine, everyone. But if they were to stay in place, then it would be like, okay, well, I'm going to check on you. If we don't have cell service and I don't get a response in 4 hours from when I message you, I'm going to find a way to try and, track you down
absolutely.
if I can. And if I'm allowed in that area and things like that.
Absolutely.
there's a lot of things I think that we need to shore up also, kind of like closing, and I'm not talking about like boarding up the office and things like that, but just making sure our notes are complete, by the end of the last day, that we finished all of the records that are super important. Again, just in case something happens.
Yeah.
We had that episode not too long ago on forensics and identifying bodies. And while we never want it to come to that, but what if it does, right? So we need to make sure that we're always inputting the right type of information and being as complete as possible and being as specific as possible to try and help in the case of the worst case scenario.
Dental hygienists are critical in that aspect. So yeah, tying up any loose ends and making sure that we're getting all our documentation and everything correct. And it was like you said, like that forensics episode we did, it kind of ties into that.
Yeah. One thing that does frustrate me, I've seen this in several Facebook groups for hygienists, that some of the people in evacuations are like, well, we're in this place and we're just going to go ahead and weather it. We're going to go ahead and stick through it. And I'm just like, I want to slap some of these people. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, don't make this. It's kind of, I don't know. Maybe I don't have the right perspective, but to me, it's a little bit selfish. And it's like, you're causing other people to come have to do stuff potentially for you,
right,
whether that's going to be rescue efforts or whatever, and endangering their lives, and their loved ones are going to be potentially impacted if it's not successful. And
when when it's like very clear, like you're hearing, like you should be evacuating. Like if you're there telling you to evacuate, you need to evacuate, not weather it out.
Right.
Because like you said, then resources get quote unquote wasted somewhat. I don't know. I hate saying that, but it's like, just like those that evacuate when they don't have to, and then it's like compounds the issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're exactly right there. And I think that goes to, kind of another point. It's just like, we need, as hygienists, we need to be better to each other. I think that overall that we've gotten worse. We've gotten more snarky and mean and whatever, especially since the pandemic stuff, with weird stuff has happened. And, we become a divided group more so than I've ever seen it before. And there are people that I'll take us, for example. We moved down to Florida. We have no family in this area. And so it's like, well, if something happens, who do we lean on? Who do we tell? Who can we evacuate to locally that has maybe a better house or a better situation or a better whatever? Again, folks, we're not living on the beach. Like, we're not rich folks over here. We're not in an evacuation zone. We're inland quite a bit. But what if we were? What if we were on the beach and I needed to reach out to somebody? What if I was Dr. Rice and I need to reach out to somebody and my family's not over until Washington State? Where do I go? Right. So we need to be better, like, to each other as colleagues and helping offer the resources to people that do need to evacuate in these types of things, and setting up those pathways kind of early on in the relationship.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. I feel like I've blathered on for 32 minutes of this episode.
No, it's really good information. It's good to stop and really look at things. And natural disasters it's a big deal. But I think if we prepare and lean on each other and help support one another through it, because it can be devastating. But if we, I think, adequately prepare, that's a critical part of it too.
Yeah,
to an extent.
absolutely.
I mean, we can only prepare so much.
Well, yeah, and that's true. We had that one doctor that was writing us from Hawaii, and she was there for the fires and stuff. And you can't prepare for something like that.
No.
You never think it's going to happen, and then all of a sudden, boom! I mean, in Hawaii of all places,
right?
I've never been to Hawaii, but I just think of it being like Florida, like green and lush, and like fires are hard to come by compared 100%. To Washington and the dry season and the mountains and stuff.
Totally.
So, I don't know what else. What else do we need to cover? I feel like that's pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like that was great. Yeah, I think those are good takeaways, good things to consider. Even just like we said, backing up your information to the cloud. Like, I didn't really think about that, but that's true. Like, that's such a good point. I mean, I think about like paper charts, how those get destroyed, but I didn't really think about, putting everything somewhere else safe, because we are responsible for the PHI. So
I'm surprised by how many people who still have local servers. Like, there are so many. Almost all of your software management systems are like cloud-based now. Like, you almost don't have an option for it. Like, if you upgrade from old generation to the new one, you think about like every year Apple comes out with a new update, right? So that everyone has to update. And so it's similar with these software management systems where, they have a new version every couple of years usually. And like at a certain point, you can't upgrade past, you have to go upgrade to the newest. You can't,
You have to.
stay with the old one. So I'm kind of surprised that there's more, server-based, the home-based stuff than there is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, for
anyway.
sure.
All right, folks. Well, we'll let you get back to your day. We appreciate you listening so much. If you have any questions, comments, obviously you can reach out to both of us. My email address is andrew@atale2hygienist.com. Annie?
Annie Walters, rdh@gmail.com.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.